An open letter to the world. For the last couple of years, a group of Indian residential school survivor warriors have been hosting meaningful and respectful democratic discourse on Facebook about the many issues surrounding their experiences in the Indian residential school system. The page is called the Indian Residential School Cart, Critical Analysis and Radical Thought. Most of the truth tellers are survivors who were confined, and their disclaimer includes the following. We thank you for your input, but please do not talk over or preach to Indian residential school survivors whose first-hand experience is shared here. This group was created to address the gap of critical analysis and radical thought on the Indian residential school system, the many issues surrounding it, and the Indian children who survived it. Attendance, healing, apologies, stereotyping, and forgiveness. Recognizing the present Canadian Indian residential school settlement process as financially exploitive, damning, and detrimental to Indian residential school survivor warriors, some members of the CART are challenging these processes, beginning with a petition they have created and circulating worldwide. Also on the agenda for the group is to support the National Indian Residential School Survivors Society's demand for a judicial review of the corrupt and non-transparent settlement processes, especially those who brokered the deal, namely Kathleen Mahoney, Phil Fontaine, and Tony Marchand and Company, and the National Administrative Committee, who are the same people. We are respectfully asking and encouraging you to read the petition, become informed, and support this initiative from this group of Indian residential school survivor warriors seeking justice from being exploited, stereotyped, demonized, silenced, and once again, re-victimized. We, the undersigned, declare that the present Indian residential school settlement process, number one, a forced process not willingly negotiated and endorsed by Indian residential school survivors, violates Indian residential school survivor basic human rights by denying Indian residential school survivors their right to make their own decisions, perpetuates further abuses against Indian residential school survivors by detrimentally stereotyping and demonizing Indian residential school survivors, serves the interests of the Canadian government and not Indian residential school survivors, serves the interest of those who brokered the settlement process and not Indian residential school survivors, serves the interest of lawyers who facilitate settlement processes for but not Indian residential school survivors. And we further declare that the Assembly of First Nations and the Canadian government do not represent Indian residential school survivors and therefore have no authority to create agreements on behalf of Indian residential school survivors. Indian residential school survivors are capable and willing to make their own decisions. And we petition the Assembly of First Nations, the National Administrative Committee, the National Consortium, and the Canadian government to, number one, rescind the present Indian residential school process. rescind the fees of the parties who brokered the process. Rescind the fees of all lawyers who facilitated settlement processes for Indian residential school survivors. Respect Indian residential school survivors' rights to make their own individual decisions on Indian residential school settlement processes. Please sign this petition. Please share it. We thank you for listening with an open mind and heart.